DW Africa Link.
That law is like every other dramatic laws that have been passed in Uganda, I would say with selfish interests, not catering to public interest. It was passed because, of course, the nature of politicians that we have, the selfish interests around our country.
Uganda's parliament has just passed the Protection of Sovereignty Bill. President Yoweri Museveni says his government is fighting for sovereignty in decision-making, free from external influence. But the opposition and human rights activists are worried. They fear, once signed into law, this act could silence dissent. So what exactly does it say? Who does it target? And what does it mean for rights and freedoms in Uganda? That's what's coming up. This is Africa Link, the podcast that connects you to the stories that matter across Africa. I am Ajua Tenkrama Domina, your host for today.
Africa Link, every weekday here on DW.
On Tuesday, May 5th, Uganda's parliament passed the controversial Protection of Sovereignty Bill 2026. The law criminalizes actions deemed to promote, quote, the interest of a foreigner against those of Uganda, and labels certain recipients of foreign funding as agents of foreigners. The government-sponsored bill is now awaiting presidential assent to become law. Now, critics fear it could significantly curb political freedoms and civil society activity. Questions are mounting among Ugandans and civil society groups alike about just how much this could impact their lives. For more on this, let's bring in Nancy Caroline Ayot. She's Programs Officer at the Center for Constitutional Governance. We also have DW's Frank Giga in Kampala. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Frank, we understand this controversial bill has been passed. What more do we know?
Yes, the bill was passed overwhelmingly, yes, by the majority of members of parliament and members of parliament in the House, because it was full house. To Ugandans, whenever there's a debate and the House is full to capacity, and you see faces you last saw 5 years ago or 10 years ago of MPs, you know that there's something suspicious that is being worked upon. It tried to have some resistance from a few members of the opposition, but still they could not beat the big numbers of the NRM party.
Prior to the bill, there was some level of resistance. We heard from opposition figures, we've even heard from human rights organizations and others. What was the main argument? What was the main point of departure on the bill and what it meant to Ugandans?
Yeah, to Ugandans, definitely this wasn't brought in good faith. A few MPs, because they are less in number in the House, tried to put up a resistance and say that this bill is anti-development, it is anti-Ugandans, and it's also anti. It's not in the right path of Ugandans who look forward to develop themselves and the country at large, because they say it is suspicious. It is meant to protect certain individuals and institutions in government, and also especially those who are in business and those who are in politics are the ones who feel that it is going to hit them hard once it is sent to by the president, which we believe is going to be soon. And so that's why the majority of the MPs who on the opposition side felt that this bill was meant for them to stop them from, proceeding with the activities and also opposing the government on so many fronts. So that's why they felt that this bill is not good for the country.
Right. Nancy, what does it mean to protect the sovereignty of a country?
In my opinion, to protect the sovereignty of a country is to assert the will of the people that is defined in Article 1 of the 1995 Constitution of Uganda. It means that this will of the people has to overwhelm the majority of decisions of individuals and also certain groups of people. That can also include the government. So if a bill is brought in in the cloak of protecting sovereignty of the people, it means that it should target primarily what the Ugandans want to present in the parliament. For example, it should protect the results of elections. It should also protect the policy priorities that protect the local Ugandan. To me, that would be the simple definition of protection of sovereignty.
Is that what Uganda is doing now?
It cannot be a yes or no answer, because every government in one way or the other has the role of protecting the sovereignty of its people by shielding it and through financial controls, which the bill seems to be trying to do. But in reality, I would say that one of the only avenues of holding state actors and government in particular accountable is through the civil society organizations, especially those that work in governance and alternative policies from political parties that present them. However, this bill directly puts those individuals and institutions under the definition of foreign agents, because domestic funding is very little and controversial for these institutions, and they are penalized greatly. So businesses could never truly fund these institutions by themselves. So foreign funding has been the direct way that people have been doing this without getting such repercussions. And now that the civic space has been constrained, I believe that it is not going to happen. This means that there will be a reduction in civic consciousness, because civic education is a big part of what goes into the funding. It's going to reduce the participation of people, especially those in rural areas, but also for marginalized groups like women, because participation of women in politics has greatly been pushed by women's rights organizations, majority of whom are foreign funded. So I do not believe that that is what this will do.
Who does this bill or this law, as it has come to be known now, who does it affect? You have mentioned the civic space and civil society organizations, but beyond them, who else is affected by this law?
Well, the law, as it has been passed, it's only waiting for presidential assent, defines an agent of a foreigner as a person who engages in activities, including activities that threaten the security of Uganda. That's a very broad definition. Acts of violence, engaging in riots and unlawful protests, which I do not believe this is genuine, even though there is a Public Order Management Act that actually addresses that. But we already know that that is very unconstitutional, because it is against the rights of lawful assembly. Disrupting lawful activities is also why it's very broad. The problem with this law is that it is so broad that it could be anybody, even though it says that an agent of a foreigner is a person who engages in activities, knowingly engages in these activities. I would say that the introduction of a mens rea or the mental intention does not mean that it blurs the line between genuine civic participation and actually disruption. So the act, however, identifies is that it identifies activities like supporting campaigns of a candidate, funding political parties, mobilizing support for a candidate. That is genuine civic participation for most people. Activities aimed at influencing the outcome of an election, activities aimed at influencing the will and the consent of the people of Uganda. Also, it defines all of that as political activities. So it says that foreigners, that people who are subsidized by foreigners, people under the supervision of a foreigner, people who are representatives or employees of a foreigner, are the people who are targeted in this. The people who are not, of course, are the people, is what majority of Ugandans were worried about before. Those are supervised institutions regulated under any other act. That was really broad. It was there before the amendments were made in the second reading. And then health and medical facilities, academic and research institutions, faith-based organizations, and private enterprises or direct foreign investment. It shows that this is there is a particular target for this, which is persons who are participating in politics, mostly perhaps those against the current government of Uganda, if it is my guess.
Will it be right then for the opposition to suspect that this is yet another bill that is coming to clamp down on dissent?
Of course, it is very right, because this is not the very first time that opposition activities are being targeted. Opposition assemblies are targeted. Their campaign rallies are stopped. They are many of them are arbitrarily arrested, and opposition has for the longest time used the support of human rights organizations to actually put pressure to make sure that they actually have a voice in certain spaces. But it is worse, because even rural communities have used the spaces provided by political parties with the help of civil society organizations to actually participate in matters of governance in the country. So they're very right when they believe that this is targeting them. But I also believe that this is directly taking away the will of many Ugandans who would like to participate in their own governance.
Thank you, Nancy. Frank, on that point, what has been the reaction of Ugandans since the passage?
Well, Ugandans have been concerned and worried right from day one when rumors started circulating that there's a bill that is coming. And indeed, it came to Parliament yesterday, and it was rushed. That was suspicion number one. And Ugandans definitely believe that all of us as Ugandans in one way or the other are going to be affected. Those in business, because actually, like Nancy said, it is broadened. It's a broad bill whereby me and Nancy right now could be categorized as agents. Yeah, if you scrutinize the bill. So you can see how many are going to be affected. And those receiving money from abroad also have to are also concerned over this, because it won't leave them. They're all going to be affected. You have to report to certain authorities on how much you're going to receive and the purpose of the money, and you have to have a letter from the government authorities authorizing you to do a transaction that is believed to come from a foreign agent or the foreigners. So that is how bad it is. People do businesses with partners abroad. People get loans from international institutions and do businesses right here. So that's how it's going to affect them. But any money that comes into the country, into their businesses, has to be checked by the government. And if you have some linkages, if you say you have political affiliations, that's when it can be problematic to you in one or the other. So some people strongly believe it had political intentions and not economic intentions. That's why it was the politicians who sat, the top NRM body that sat and came up with this bill and then forwarded it to Parliament without an economist to challenge it in one or the other. It's why you saw economists coming in like a week ago to challenge it on how it is bad for economy and the development of the country. So politicians see it to their advantage, and the economists and the general Ugandans see it as a disadvantage to them as individuals and as a country at large.
Well, Frank, I've seen a statement from President Yoweri Museveni last week, about 5 days ago, when he directly responded to some of the things you have said. So he says that this bill that he initiated actually, it's not a bill to stop foreign direct investment, as people are speculating, or a bill to stop support for religious bodies from abroad or remittances from Ugandans who are working abroad. I don't know if that explanation was well received by people, critics of this particular bill.
Well, we are waiting to see if he will return it to Parliament for further debate, because one of the highlights we saw in Parliament yesterday, financial institutions shall submit monthly reports. And here, financial institutions, they say that agents of foreigners required to submit returns to the minister. Now, here, agents of foreigner. Who is an agent of a foreigner? That's why it is. It could be a church that is an agent of a foreigner, and it's clearly, described here in the bill that all those receiving huge amounts of money from foreigners have to get authorization from the minister. So if it is that the president, according to his letter, distanced himself from these so-called allegations, if I'm to call them, well, we'll wait to see if he'll throw it back to Parliament to make these amendments, because they were included in the bill. Whoever receives money has to get authorization from the government. I think there is a cap. There is a cap of the amount of money, but of course, if it comes to bigger institutions like NGOs, churches, they receive huge sums of money for the operations. So they exit the government cap. So that means it is the government to authorize them whether to use the money or not, so long as they show details, the purpose of the money, where it's coming from, its intentions, and all that.
One last question to you, Frank, before I go back to Nancy. We know the swearing in of the president is in about a week's time. Does it have anything to do with the rush with which this bill was passed?
I don't think that it is to do with the president swearing in, but just like the speaker said, this is the last bill that they have passed, because Parliament is closing, and they don't want to shift this to the next Parliament. It's like saying, saving the best for last. To Ugandans, it wasn't like that, though the speaker said that it was saving the worst for last. So it is not connecting with the swearing in, but it is connecting or related to this house, so they don't take it to the next house. They don't want any delays, yes.
It's good you said to Ugandans, this does not work, because I don't necessarily think that they see this as a best for the last. But thank you so much, Frank. Nancy, your final words. If you have the chance to propose any amendment to this particular law, what would you be looking at?
Thank you very much. Before the bill was officially passed, some amendments by the Attorney General were adopted. And some of these amendments, I already said, it excluded some of the private enterprises and the businesses that the president so-called talked about, talked about in his letter, including even religious institutions. So it has narrowed it down to political activities, if it may. So if I were to propose an alternative, there is no alternative, because there are already regulatory frameworks that actually manage all these institutions. The NGO Acts, the NGO has a lot of regulatory frameworks. The financial institutions have a lot of regulatory frameworks. Even the Political Parties Act also manages all these, and the political party funding. So I feel like this law is redundant and has no place in the answers of Uganda.
Interesting. One last thing we didn't talk about that I want us to talk about now is the punishment for breaking this law or for going against the tenets of this bill, which is a maximum of 20 years in prison. Is that right?
Well, if you think about what this law has been framed at, with the framing of this law, it is called the protection of sovereignty. So if people are framed as persons who want to sabotage the will of this country, that is basically treason. So yes, when you think about the punishment and the so-called intent, then yes, it would be proportional. However, in reality, practically, the crimes that they're putting here, which is the financing of civic participation, advocacy, political participation of Ugandans, I would think that it's just a draconian law. So I do not think it's appropriate, but also we wait yet to see the fine print of the law, because what was passed, like I said, the Attorney General made some amendments, and the Committee on Internal Affairs and Legal Affairs, which is a committee that collaborated on this, that that had the opinions of the public on this bill adopted some of those recommendations. And one of the things that they said during the second reading of the bill was that 20 years was a whole lot and it should be reduced to 10 years, but also that the 200 currency points should be reduced to 100 currency points, which is approximately $102,000. So it is still a whole lot if you think about it, but we wait to see what the fine print of the law says before it is sent.
So just to clarify, the years have been reduced from 20 years to 10?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you both so much for your time. You just heard Programs Officer at the Center for Constitutional Governance, Nancy Caroline Ayot. You also heard DW correspondent in Kampala, Uganda, Frank Yiga. Thank you both for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ajua.
Africa is changing. Don't get left behind. Tune in to Africa Link. As Uganda moves closer to enacting this law, the debate comes down to one tension: protecting national sovereignty versus preserving fundamental freedoms. And on the street, concerns are growing about who exactly will feel the impact once President Museveni signs it into law.
That law is like every other dramatic laws that have been passed in Uganda. I would say with selfish interests, not catering to public interest. A law in whose process the Governor Bank of Uganda tells you that this cannot work. The man in charge of the inflow and outflow of money in the country, by the time it tells you that it will affect those processes, you can't go ahead and pass it. But it was passed because, of course, the nature of politicians that we have, the selfish interests around our country, and it's going to be like these other dramatic laws that we have seen.
Looking at the time that it is when the 11th Parliament actually has come to a closure, and also in respect of the procedure that was followed, the consultations that were done, they were not sufficient. But even the little that was done was not put into consideration. And 60% of the members of Parliament in the 11th have been kicked out. So whatever they passed, they thought they had no way they would get a remedy out. But trust me, today or tomorrow, some of them have these organizations, they have these initiatives, and they're going to be victims of the same that they are passing, especially that they have now left the source where they've been able to get money and earn a living. But also on the broader perspective, it does have an implication on the healthcare systems, it has an implication on the education systems, and it has an implication on the complementary role that it has been playing. You cannot talk about sovereignty when you have always been borrowing some of this money from outside and bring it in a context of we are now actually protecting Uganda's sovereignty.
Personally, as a young person who has been very actively engaged with the civil society organization, I believe this bill is going to affect how these organizations are supposed to interact with the young people, other people in communities. In fact, if you see that this civil society organization, most of them try as much as possible to fill in the voids and the gaps in which the government cannot do. You find them there in communities trying to teach the young people on civic engagement, on policy making. With this bill being passed, there's going to be a reduction on how these organizations are going to come to the grassroots level to teach people on how law is made, on how politics run in the country, and that is going to affect majority of people in this country.
For some, this law is a necessary step toward independence. Yet for others, it raises serious concerns about democratic space, accountability, and the future of civic life in Uganda. We'll be watching closely as this unfolds, but for now, you can share your thoughts on this topic with us on Facebook and on TikTok at DW Africa. Listen to us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our DW Africa YouTube channel. This show was co-produced and edited by Eddie Micah Jr. And I am Ajua Tinkrama Domina. Bye for now.
DW. Made for Mind.